hearing a bit about trade unions, co-option from the centre we've already talked a bit about, and also from the anti-climate right, which we touched on a bit in the first session, kind of in terms of Bolsonaro, Modi, Trump. Because I think, yeah, we also do need to be thinking internationally when we talk about decarbonisation. You know, that's obviously an argument that the right make a lot, that, you know, why are you talking about Britain, it's all about China, but, you know, the thing is about our emissions is they do impact globally, so, and as internationalists we should care globally.
Is that to us?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a really useful way of putting it about obstacles to decarbonising, because I think there's a way in which there can be a slightly thin analysis of what's in the way of like people lack of political will, or the government's lazy, or and actually there were really powerful moneyed interests in the way. It's not just that people can't be bothered, or so I think obviously fossil fuel companies are the main. They've spent the most money on stopping climate, or on taking climate action. I guess there's the few caveats again I'd have about that is that fossil fuel companies, there's the kind of privately owned ExxonMobils, the Chevrons, but then there's also the state-owned fossil fuel companies, the Gazprom and so on, Saudi Aramco, and that does change things because these, I guess Russia and Saudi Arabia, for example, it's easy to ask them to give up their fossil fuels because they're relatively better off. But there are actually loads of countries that are similarly fossil fuel, sort of less famous petrostates that are fossil fuel export dependent, which I personally haven't read much or seen much about the real effects of that on these economies that are completely reliant on fossil fuels. So I think it's quite easy to just we think of the obstacle, we think, oh, let's hate fossil fuel companies, they're so easy to hate, and some of them are really hateful. But there's just a bit, again, it's more complicated, which again raises, as you said, the global question about, in some ways, the nation state is obviously our main sort of mechanism for addressing the climate crisis, our government, basically. But there is an argument to be made that the nation state is, in some senses, an impediment to climate action, because a lot of these new green programs are as we've seen, very domestic, and they think about American jobs and American emissions, and emissions obviously respect no borders. So and as Zita mentioned as well, the impacts of emissions equally do not respect borders. So yeah, the global south suffering basically the worst of the impacts, and the global north causing most of it. And so the thing is about, if you need this kind of international coordinated coalition to roll out this what should be a global program, there is an argument that in order for this putative international body to have real jurisdiction and power and legitimacy, you need to actually rein in the autonomy of nation states. They need to have less power. So yeah, that to me seems somehow intractable sometimes, just because of the way politics, this as Brexit, but so much politics is taking this kind of inward turn, which seems to really bode ill, I think, for that question.
If I can come in briefly myself, I think it is really correct to identify nation states as one of the primary kind of enemies, really, when we're talking about climate. I mean, for instance, the US military is the biggest single polluter globally. And the Guardian recently published a statistic about the 20 polluting firms who are responsible for a third of all emissions. By responsible, by the way, they meant they produce fossil fuels. So obviously there's a huge amount of economic activity that depends on those fossil fuels, but here are the 20 that produce them. 12 of them were state-owned, and then the rest of them, are huge multinationals that Europe and the US are going to be backing to the hills when they're thinking about their foreign policy. So I think that's got to come into the kind of strategy for decarbonisation. You're really talking about taking on the kind of fundamentally how the global system of imperialist competition between states has been organised. And it's been mentioned like that it's kind of always depended really like a lot on fossil fuels and the energy you can get from fossil fuels. That's not like an anti-Green New Deal view though, I think, because necessarily. But it does kind of point to the areas where a climate program is going to have to be really like against the state. It's not going to be like reforming the state. It's going to be against that. It's going to be like the military. We need to get rid of it. Angus, do you want to come in on the? I've got 2 more questions, which probably trouble you.
Sure. Yeah. I think I'll take a different angle maybe, because that was pretty comprehensive around legislative and international order. I'd say that the only thing to add is that we're not making, and we need to make, and plans are afoot to make demands of, let's say, like Britain's role in global climate negotiations. Britain will be COP26 next year. It's obviously like a deeply malign force within those negotiations. It was the imperial axis which removed indigenous rights from the text of Paris 21, which blocked transfers of technology and finance to the global south. And we were relatively silent. Indeed, I mean, like some of us, were doing, I must say, relatively pointless actions outside of it, rather than actively building power towards making proper political demands. I'd say one strategic question, which obviously difficulty and obviously plays into a much broader role, is the role of trade unions and the worker movement in the UK. Obviously not, so at the Labour conference, at least seven unions, including Unite and Unison, who represent energy workers, signed up to the Green New Deal motion, including a 2030 target. That was a big step forward, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're on board with the scale of what needs to be done, nor does it mean that GMB, whose General Secretary, for example, the day afterwards attacked the motion, saying they would demand the banning of meat, the one flight every 5 years, and would be a massive vote loser. So, which it isn't. Nor does it mean that obviously all trade unions are on board. The whole point of the Green Deal for us is a vehicle to unite climate and class politics. But that is obviously much more ambitious. What you need to do there is not just about, let's say, the fossil industry. You need, when we say a worker-led just transition, I think we need to be honest about the scale of it. It means, there's a very good article by David Wearing in Commonwealth's Green New Deal series, talking about how you need to, let's say, actually transform the whole of arms, fossil industry, the whole basis of the UK economy, which is entwined with fossil capital, which is entwined with the City of London. And that's actually a huge undertaking, and you need to actually build a workers' movement which is actually going to be proactive about those demands in this country, which is actually going to be going there and demanding a Lucas plan for every factory and every plant across the country. That's not easily done, nor can it just be done from above by winning a motion at the Labour Party conference. That's long, patient work. Corbynism, or indeed any other most other revolutionary struggles have not really made many inroads into the workers' movement and trade unions in this country yet. We need to do that because it's where our project falls or succeeds is the extent to which we can actively produce a militant movement that's going out and building that transformation from the ground up. That's a key strategic site. That's one that we're focused on, but it's one that requires work far beyond our volunteer campaign.
Thanks.
Hello. Yeah, better.
So the next sort of topic I thought I'd whiz through is talking about resources, because people in mainstream climate movements will often talk sort of very breezily about renewables, but renewables have to be obviously built, and they require huge amounts of minerals and metals. List, they have great names. Cobalt, nickel, silver, neodymium, lithium. You need all these things to make solar panels, to make wind farms, to make electric cars. They're scarce, and also all the mining happens in the global south. I found a brilliant video on the World Bank website called Climate Smart Mining, which says, with over 3 billion people living in resource-rich countries, there is a real opportunity for the poorest and most vulnerable to benefit from the energy transition. Everybody from governments to mining companies to the end users of renewable technologies must work together. Which is like super reassuring. But so obviously, aside from that fantasy, extractivism is going to be a major issue. If we're talking about if we think of a Green New Deal in sort of in terms of like a more kind of green growth version, a more version based on kind of industrial jobs and maintaining energy usage at a really high level, producing lots of renewables, that means an awful lot of nickel and other stuff. I think, and so that has two implications, right? It has one implication for as anti-imperialists, where do we stand? And secondly, in terms of it actually places some hard limits on what are our options for what gets produced. So I guess that's kind of, Angus, you mentioned lots of different versions of the Green New Deal, so thoughts in that regard, and low relation to the sort of pragmatism question, I guess that's kind of relevant. So if you want to go the opposite order this time.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really important question. It's a really important tension, which without a proper, ambitious transformational movement will intrinsically tend towards the neo-imperialist and towards neo-extractivism. I think, again, the question of, let's say, how do you reduce net, like, aggregate energy use while also offering people a vision they can get behind is really key. And again, I come back to that vision of public luxury. So intrinsically, Labour is going to tend towards replace petrol cars or diesel cars or whatever with electric cars. Intrinsically, that's going to be based on a new wave of extractivism. There's a tension starting to emerge, and it's starting to edge in the right direction. And Labour recently making an announcement that every petrol car will be an electric car by 2030. But at the same time, offering fleets of community cars to be used locally, kind of looks like a people. I think the talk was Corbyn cars, but it got canned. So the people's Uber. We'll have to fall back on. And that's exactly the kind of direction that we need to be moving towards, as well as like this mass public transport that I talked about earlier, connecting every single part of the country, abolishing pacer trains tomorrow for the north of England and offering luxurious new trains. Instead, but also, of course, there's and let's say take another area, for example, say if you want to reduce people's, I'm slightly tangenting here, but reduce people's meat consumption. The best way to do that isn't just to like massively whack up meat tax. It's to have a national food service with community canteens that bring people together, ending the malaise or starting to end the malaise of loneliness in our society, and instead offering best vegan food locally for everyone. The other point, kind of internationally, is a difficult one. It's one to which we don't have all the answers yet. I'd say we need kind of more public partnerships. We need treaties which enshrine the rights of indigenous peoples, which enshrine the rights of working class people, and an international development policy, which Labour is actually, I think, making really good steps towards. Which is based on fundamentally on equality and justice, not neo-colonial dynamics. There's going to have to be obviously a certain degree of extraction of resources, but it needs to be done in a way that is not intrinsically tied up as it has been with neo-colonial violence. Obviously, the Global South is not just a passive recipient here. It's about working class movements in the Global South. It's about socialist movements in the Global South as well. I think it's 6 months into our campaign, it's a question that we're starting to work towards. From our end, the answers are net reduction of energy use with justice-based supply chains all the way through, which you can achieve a certain amount at a state level, if not all of it.
Okay. So my last topic was sort of thinking about kind of justice and so we've talked about like decarbonisation, but there's also questions about interventions, demands that we can raise that are kind of more directly about tackling the injustices that are produced by the impact of climate breakdown. And also kind of how that can tie into a vision for a Green New Deal, like what would people need to spend their days doing and be supported to do if we were taking, justice for people at the sharp end of climate breakdown seriously. So I'm thinking kind of about like care work, about orders, migration, that kind of thing. Or I can just throw that to the floor unless anyone has time.
To the floor. I think the floor is saying to the floor.
To the floor, okay.